Alright, continuing on with part 2 of this video series. I'm going to get into more analysis in just a moment. There's been a couple of developments in the French shooting in terms of them really going all out to build victim consciousness. We had a bunch of the world leaders. Obama basically skipped this um, victim fest. However, most of the rest of the so-called developed nations and all of Europe came out for this event. I really can't put into words how ridiculous this whole event is. All these world leaders joining arms and being in defiance of ISIS. I'm going to develop this point even more so. But to start off with these world leaders, what has ISIS been around for? 3 years, where they have a website and some like fake beheadings. It's just an unbelievable insult to us all to have these people coming out, again, the news media, everybody, and basically saying these trillion-dollar countries and corporations and these massive military expenditures and these huge military units, and they're in defiance against this little organization that really only exists on the internet. It appears that more than likely that ISIS was created by Israel and perhaps a little bit by the CIA, and maybe the European nations also had a hand in it. But they're all certainly using this organization just like they all used Al-Qaeda to develop this victim consciousness from an organization that they created. Again, these powerful nations, these all-powerful nations, are playing the victim, playing this role of the victim. They are trying to infuse us all with this victim consciousness. They're really working this victim consciousness more than I would have originally thought. Another thing that's going on is this Charlie Hebdo, the French magazine, the satirical magazine that posted all the offensive cartoons that would be offensive to all the Muslim people, is posting another picture, another caricature of Muhammad on their front cover. So if you understand, this magazine is probably something like, I wouldn't say Mad Magazine, but maybe like The Onion or something like that. I don't know, National Lampoon. But it's very political and it's completely provocative. And it's posting yet another cartoon in defiance, like this adolescent defiance, that somehow the Muslim people control the country of France. They're the parents. And this magazine is acting out against the power that is the Islamic people. Again, this is just another example of them inverting everything. It's like they're the ones who are victimized. They're the ones that are oppressed. They're the ones who are being prejudiced against. These cartoons are incredibly offensive. They'd be offensive to Muslim people. They'd be offensive to Christians. They'd be offensive to atheists. If you have someone in your life that you respect and love or honor, if you had a grandfather or somebody who was a hero in your town, and somebody started putting up these cartoons, I mean, they're hateful and they're just despicable in lots of ways. These cartoons were designed to provoke people, to provoke the Muslim people, but also give a reason for these alleged terrorist attacks, to give them some reason to roll out this I am Charlie propaganda. And more than anything else, these cartoons are immature and they're just not funny. I didn't find any of them funny, not even a little bit. They're just basically 100% hostile. And to add insult to injury, many of you know there are rules in the Islamic tradition about depictions of Muhammad, and they're not as far-fetched as people might think. The simple explanation is the Prophet Muhammad was against idol worship, and many of the Sunni Muslims that make up between 80 and 90% of the Muslim population, which is around 1.4 billion people, believe that it goes against the Prophet Muhammad's teachings to make likenesses of him, whether it be pictures or statues, because that would be idolatry. So this is why these types of depictions are offensive to the Muslim people. You have to understand that idol worship has always plagued the human being. Every spiritual teacher that came down and tried to impart knowledge onto the masses had to deal with idol worship. Idol worship is more alive than ever, even in this so-called scientific era where we're supposed to be modern and evolved. So they create this magazine that's totally dishonorable. There's nothing heroic or noble about this magazine. They stage a fake shooting there and they roll out their victimization propagation. And what do? They also roll out idol worship. You have all these pencils, this objectification of an event where the pencil symbolizes the free press, which we know they're not free at all, or they'd be doing reporting on actual truthful events. And then you have all these altars, these candlelit altars that they set up. These altars are just another form of idolatry. They're setting up idol worship. So it's just basically putting salt in the wound. And then you have all these celebrities who are liberal. You know, they're too sophisticated for religion, but they have no problem backing just what can be considered just absolutely punky behavior as this magazine mocks somebody's belief system. You know, not in a way that they're trying to educate or they're trying to lift people up, they're trying to help people be better. They're just mocking the Muslim people. They're just disrespecting 1.4 billion people. There's nothing noble or honorable about it. In my understanding of how this all works, it starts off with idol worship, and then people move towards religion, and then eventually they move towards spirituality, which is the next great step for the human race. I'll talk about this more in later videos. But we see this now with the powers that be. They're trying to degrade us and bring us all back to idol worship. They bombard us with symbols and idols all the time. There's nothing noble or honorable with what's going on here. There are no heroes. As I said before in a previous video, the French people believe that they have a Muslim problem. The French people, like many of the European people and like many of the American population, aren't reproducing at a very high rate. Muslims are immigrating to France, and they also are reproducing at a high rate, and pretty soon they're going to control the European countries. That's the way the world's going. This is just one of many of the problems that the powers that be, the people that control our material planet, are facing, where they're about to lose control. They're at a stage where they're going to lose control of the economy. They're at the stage that they're going to lose control of the information network, you know, the internet. With changing weather patterns and the movement of the tectonic plates and other things like solar flares, there's all kinds of problems that the powers that be are having where they can no longer control what's going on. So their solution is to create victim conscious and try to instill martial law. As we continue, one of the darkest patterns and behaviors we need to recognize in the world around us is called grooming. Whenever we are getting set up for something that's bad for us, there's always a grooming process that happens that is performed on us that brings us over to the dark side. Sex offenders, sociopaths, all of these dark sort of malevolent personalities, anytime there's any sort of criminal behavior, anytime there's manipulation and coercion, any underhanded dealings, you see grooming. Grooming is what takes us from righteous living onto a dark path, into the negative realm, into the dark realm. It happens gradually after a series of steps, and right now one of the major grooming processes is grooming us for martial law. And what's going on with this French shooting perfectly illustrates how we're all being groomed for martial law. You can see shortly after, a day or two after the shooting, I think it was only within 24 hours, they had 88,000 troops on the streets of France for this alleged manhunt for these terrorists that supposedly committed this mass shooting. So they mobilized all of these troops, and just in a short period of time, France was under martial law. You have this many troops on the street and people are under confinement and being harassed. You have martial law. Again, we see this a cyclical pattern. Where did we just see this before? A major city just went through this very same process. Again, these patterns repeating themselves. A fake staged bombing, and then a suspect roaming the streets. The whole city goes into lockdown. There's a curfew. People have to stay in their homes. Military rolls out. I think it was like 100,000 troops, or maybe even more than that. Looks like a war zone. The entire city of Boston is under siege by military troops, going door to door, harassing people, taking people out into the streets, pointing guns at people within their homes. This is martial law. This is all this for a 19-year-old unarmed kid. They end up shooting as he's unarmed. It's just ridiculous. And what else do we see? The trial for this kid is now taking place over the same period of these French shootings. Again, pattern repeating itself. It mirrors what happened in Boston. What's happening in France is happening in Boston. People are seeing this. People all over the world are seeing troops on the streets of a major international city. They're all getting used to having this martial law. This is becoming, they're normalizing this behavior. This is all grooming. They start off with victim conscious. Oh my God, there's a terrorist on the loose. And then they just unleash the hounds. They unleash this military presence, 100,000 troops walking around the street, people being harassed. Everybody gets used to it. Oh, this is normal behavior. This is all grooming. Victim consciousness that leads to grooming. Again, we see these patterns domestically repeating themselves internationally. We just saw this with Noah Posner. 2 days and 2 years after Sandy Hook, there's the Pakistani massacre. Again, the same sort of event at a school. Children supposedly being massacred. And they roll out all their altars and their candlelight vigils, and it just touches a chord in everybody's heart. All these poor children were murdered. It touches this sense of revulsion. And then shortly thereafter, you have a bombing in a major American city. Then there's a so-called terrorists at large, and this major city goes into lockdown, and they roll out martial law. The whole world is watching. Everybody associates Sandy Hook with Boston bombing. This is all grooming. Oh, those poor children are killed. Terrorists did this. Then the Boston bombing happened, and the two events are linked. They're linked in all of our minds on a worldwide basis. So then when they roll out the Pakistani massacre, and then 2 weeks or a month later they have the French shooting, those two events are linked in our minds. And they've been poisoning our minds with this idea of ISIS. They've been grooming us for rolling out ISIS. And so then they have this idea that, oh, there's all these sleeper cells that are going to be unleashed on the country of France. So they throw out more troops. They roll out more troops. And the whole world is being groomed for martial law. We really have martial law right now. So you take a country like France, a city like Paris, they have this idea of liberté. It's known for its liberty, for its idea of being a free country. And everybody sees there's all this martial law rolled out on the streets. It must be a good thing. And then there's a celebration. They have these major march, again, a march of defiance to defy those nasty rebels that we control and that we created. And then 1 million people go and march on the street. They're celebrating martial law. We're seeing all this. We already just been through this again. The same thing happened in Boston. Boston, a place known for its freedom, the Boston Tea Party. It's known for its rebellious spirit, for being defiant. The people in Boston, I grew up near that area, very aggressive, very confrontational. They were just locked down like little children. They were given a curfew. They were sent to their rooms. And all of them, they were martial law, troops on the street. They were hunting for this unarmed 19-year-old kid with no military experience. He had no training of any kind, but it takes 100,000 troops to catch him, and then the place explodes into this celebration. They're celebrating their captivity. They're celebrating losing their rights. They're celebrating descending into martial law. And all the world is seeing this. Oh, you have these events. There's all this victim consciousness, but the troops come in and save us. They save us from the terrorists, and this is a good thing. Everybody's getting conditioned. They're being groomed for martial law. And in fact, this is actually martial law. I mean, we can call it whatever we want, temporary martial law, but everybody is seeing martial law. There's troops all over the place nowadays. It's martial law. We all live in a police state. Now, going back to this trauma cycle, between 1 o'clock we have victim stance and the poor me statement. And just opposite of that, on the other side of the cycle, we have grooming at 7 and 8 o'clock. These two things go hand in hand. They set up the victimization, and then they use the victimization to groom for the offense. Now, the grooming part of the assault cycle is always the worst. It's the greasiest, it's the slimiest part, and all people who have been groomed, have been victimized, are always most traumatized by the grooming process, because the offender wins their trust and often acts like a hero. I'm going to get into that in just a few moments. So going back to what's happened here in America, or really what we're talking about is a worldwide phenomenon. This has happened on a worldwide basis. Grooming is a series of ever more invasive steps, starting with the least invasive step first and then becoming more and more invasive. We saw this with 9/11, and they rolled out the Patriot Act. There was a great deal of victim consciousness, worldwide victim consciousness released in 9/11. They really developed this narrative. They spent a lot of money and a lot of time developing this narrative, and then they rolled this out in the airport. Probably remember what happened first. We were going to the airport, and what did they ask you to do? They asked you to take off your shoes. Why? Because of the shoe bomber. So that was the first step. That was the first invasive step. They're asking you to take off an article of clothing. Then what happened next? They start rifling through your luggage. Why? Because of the transatlantic aircraft plot. You remember that happened in England. And then they're rifling through your belongings. Next was the underwear bomber. Now they get to take naked body scanner pictures, radiate you or frisk you and pat you down. They're getting to put their hands on you. Each step is more invasive than the last. And then this all becomes normal. People go to the airport, get used to being touched and prodded and looked upon suspiciously. And they get, then they roll this out at malls and the sporting events and other places, or they take it right to your door in case of France now, or Boston, the Boston bombing. They take the martial law right to your door. All of this is grooming. We're being conditioned to accept this as normal behavior, even though deep down all of us know there's something wrong with this. There's something dangerous about this. Unfortunately, most of us have forgotten what it's like, or never experienced it in our lives, what it's like to be under martial law. We fear the terrorists more than we fear the police, who are controlled by the real evil entity. And so they're able to groom us. They're able to use these grooming steps and bring in something that we really don't know how bad it is. And like I said, we're already living under a police state. If you look between grooming and victim stance, you'll see power and control. And I talked about this quite extensively in the last video, that people with these dark type of personality types really get off on getting over on people. They really get off on contaminating people and bringing them over to the dark side. They get off on being in power and control and victimizing and demeaning and dominating somebody else. So you can see why there's been this rollout of whatever you want to call it, Illuminati or satanic or Freemasonic symbolism in videos, and this dark, malevolent themes that you see all across pop culture videos. You can see that they are really working it. They're really working hard to contaminate. It's like it's like when a vampire bites a normal person and turns that person into a vampire. They're trying to inject the youth with all this dark level, malevolent level consciousness. They're trying to bring them over into this dark realm. I was shocked. I hadn't watched pop culture videos for years. I didn't know anything about the Illuminati or satanic worship or whatever. And then, 7 years ago when I started doing some research into this, I was stunned by the images that they were showing, how far they had gone, how much grooming had taken place, and how explicit all of these videos were becoming. And these young people were absorbing all of this type of rhetoric. Young people are just being infused with this malevolent condition, with this dark energy. And I noticed the other day, I was pulling some screenshots, and I saw this article, and as soon as I saw the title and I figured out what the article was about, I just knew this would be a great example about how to illustrate grooming. And I looked at the video and I pulled some screenshots, and it's a perfect example to show how grooming works, how sexual offending grooming works, how they're grooming our children with this dark energy in terms of the pop culture and these Illuminati satanic videos, and all of these types of things that are going now, whether it be martial law, of all of this stuff. The imagery in this video and the video itself, which is a grooming instrument, just perfectly illustrates this process. And I also am always amazed at how when I'm making these videos, while I'm doing research, things will just jump off the page and just help pull these videos together. As I said earlier, grooming is a series of ever more invasive steps. The predator starts off with low intensity grooming behaviors, and then they get more intense until they reach their desired result. Most sex offenses, and what we're talking about here in terms of grooming, are not rape. They're not using force. The predator is using coercion, they're using manipulation, and worst of all, they gain their victim's trust. This is the worst part, the sickest part of the sexual offending process, and across the board what we're going through now with martial law and that type of thing. All children crave adult attention, positive adult attention. They crave attention from their elders. And even as adults, people crave attention from the system, from their authority figures. They want a pat on the back. They want to be appreciated. And sex offenders and these malevolent personality types know what people want. They know psychologically how to gain trust. Also, the sex offenders or the malevolent personality types also know how to present themselves as a compassionate figure, as a victim to the children, as someone that is misunderstood, or somebody who has been wounded or hurt, and gain the child's trust that way. So there is a variety of different techniques and methods and manipulations these malevolent personality types use to groom their victims, but they take advantage of the fact that children are craving attention, are craving to be loved. Often nowadays they don't have a lot of one-on-one connection. And so what the abuser does is that they win the victim's heart, they win the child's heart, and the child becomes attached to the abuser, and they become loyal to the abuser, and they look up to the abuser. The abuser is someone that they want to aspire to be like. And now that the abuser has their trust, has the victim's trust, they start taking the relationship to a dark place using these ever-invasive grooming steps. First, they just wanted to get the child to do something naughty, a non-sexual naughty behavior. Something like maybe playing a video game the child knows they're not supposed to do, or getting the child to steal something. Just get the child to do something that brings them over to the dark side. It also gives the abuser something they can use against the child to make the child feel guilty, to scare the child into saying, if you don't do this other thing, I'm going to tell your parents, I'm going to get you in trouble for these naughty behaviors that you've done. So now the child is engaged in doing things that are wrong. We see this again with the martial law. A lot of people are aware that what the government is doing is wrong, but they're scared to speak up. They've gone along with it. And once you've gone along with it, it gets harder and harder to say no. We see this with the TSA and the airport. Once that you've allowed them to put your hands on you, it's harder for you to say no when the TSA shows up at your mall or shows up at your home. So once they've established this type of behavior is normal, it's harder and harder for you to say no. And that's what grooming is all about. The abuser is wearing away your no, wearing away your objection, wearing away your defenses. Ultimately, they're wearing down the child or wearing away the child themselves. The personality now is getting changed. They're becoming objectified. They start losing their sense of identity, their ability to say no. They become an extension of the abuser. They start thinking that the only reason they exist is to please the abuser. They also start feeling guilty for the abuse. This is another stage in the grooming process where the abuser blames the victim for the abuse that's happening. So the victim themselves is the one feeling like it's their fault that the abuse is occurring. And this is where kind of the sickness comes in of the abuser. They're just feeding off of this energy as they destroy this person. They destroy these young people. And they destroy a whole country as they destroy a whole world of people. And they bring them over to this dark, icky, malevolent side. And the abuser and whatever malevolent negative entities that they're attached to, whatever dark forces that are working through the abuser are feeding off of all this pain, off of all this suffering, of being able to dominate someone else in this manner. So this is where you get into all this MK Ultra stuff, all this mind control stuff that you hear about. It's really just being able to take control over a person's soul, take control over someone's existence. I'm going to cover the evil aspect of this in another video. I have some video that I was already making for my UN series, so I'm not going to get into more of this here. But it's important to understand that this martial law that has already taken place, we're already basically under a police state, and all this victim consciousness that they use to bring us to this place, it's more than just about having a police presence in our lives. It's taking us over to taking us to a dark place. It's taking us over to the dark side. So do you see it? Do you see the pattern here? This pattern where they create a victimization situation, victim consciousness. They create a victim, a poor me statement. I get to do this because this has happened to me. Collectively, they're creating this victim consciousness. And then they start grooming away your rights. They start wearing away your rights, taking away your rights through a grooming process. So a few days ago, I came across this video of the president of France making a statement after the shooting. And this is what he said. An act of exceptional barbarism has been committed in Paris against a newspaper. A paper, in other words, an organ of free speech. An act against journalists who had always wanted to show that in France it was possible to defend one's own ideas and exercise their rights that are guaranteed and protected by the Republic. You can remember after 9/11, President Bush said a very similar thing. He said, they hate us for our freedom. And that became the sort of rallying call. But who is they? I mean, the they can't be the terrorists that they've created and they control. Is they the government and these presidents themselves, or their puppet masters, or the dark energy, the dark forces that control even those people, the banksters and so forth? Or is they us? Are we the ultimate enemy? Do we control some power? Or do we have some potential in us that can change the world around us, can change the universe around us, and displace all these negative forces, displace all these negative entities that control the world? And this is what I try to get at in all my videos. There is something that we can do to change the world, not the outer material world, but we can change the world within ourselves. We can change ourselves. We can change our inner condition, our inner characters, and then you'll see a change, a transformation in the world. The world will start reflecting the noble qualities and our higher nature, our higher condition, our ability to connect to the God within us.